Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Monday, September 9th, and Grace and I are here to talk through Baylor's 23-12 loss at number 12 Utah on Saturday. Grayson, you said last week you thought Baylor would need 27 points to win this game. I said early in the week that I thought Baylor would need 30 points. Well, we were both wrong to an extent. Baylor needed 24 to win it, and they couldn't get it. But if we're being honest, like a lot of those points in this particular game and how it unfolded, they might not have even needed all of those points if they would have just fixed up some issues that they had early in this game.
Definitely. I think the thing that is kind of two sides to the coin, right, is the fact that, yeah, if Baylor doesn't just give Utah points, yeah, it might have turned out differently. Also, on the flip side, we might have been right had Cam Rising played the whole game. So there's multiple ways to look at it, of course. Yeah. But you're exactly right. You know, Baylor giving away free points, that's a problem. And early in a game, when you get yourself down in a hole early to a team that doesn't lose at home, you're putting your offense in a really, really tough situation. And part of it was the offensive's part of it was special teams. It was kind of a mixture of a multitude of things that really set them back early on in the game.
Right. So Utah was up 7-0 early after a long play. A DeQuan Finn sack fumble. I mean, within a split second, he was sacked on one of Baylor's early plays. Utah gets the ball back at the 3-yard line, goes up 14-0 after one play. And then later in the second quarter, Baylor still hasn't scored. Utah has added a field goal. They block a field goal, return it for a 77-yard touchdown, I believe it was, and go up 23-0. The missed extra point, have an issue there. But if you look at that swing in this particular game, that's the difference in this game. And instead of going for two late when Baylor doesn't get it, they're kicking an extra point to tie it. And obviously a lot of things could change. Cam Rising doesn't get hurt. He doesn't go out. But in this particular game, that's how it happened. And those two plays kept this one from being close late.
It did. I mean, and again, you got to look at a multitude of ways, because I also think Utah decided to, hey, you know what? We're just going to run the football and we're going to get out of here with the win. So there are other factors to this. And so I don't want to simplify it too much by just saying that, oh, you know, Baylor's definitely in this game if this and this happens, because you don't know how that changes play calling, how that changes game management, things like that. So it's important to mention. I think in general, though, this was a thing that Dave Aranda mentioned all offseason, starting fast, starting quickly. And in this game, they did not. And on both sides, like, I know the defense ends up having a good game, but they didn't start off very strong. They gave up the big play and the touchdown, but also let's not forget, Lorando Johnson was beat by 3 yards on a perfectly thrown ball by Cam Rising, and Dorian Sanger just dropped it. That would have been another explosive play for them. So they had guys open. They clearly had the advantage early on as far as their scheme and what they wanted to do. And because of that, it resulted in them being sharper and more prepared to pounce on the mistakes that Baylor did end up making.
Yeah, and that's part of a good team in Utah, projected to win the Big 12, an experienced team, a stability in their head coaching ranks, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator. They've been like, you would expect a Utah team to do that and come out, start fast, whereas Baylor's very unstable. A lot of moving pieces, a lot of transfers into the program, new offensive coordinator, tons of new faces on offense and on defense. And so looking back, you want to say, yes, Baylor should have done this, but it plays out to almost the identity of these teams and saying it makes sense of how these games started. Utah had their identity. That's what they played to. And I think starting with Baylor's offense specifically, that just snowballed on them early on. I think the entire team really set in, and the stats kind of tell the story on both sides of the ball, but the offense that the start that they got off to just put them in an incredible hole. The special teams issue on the blocked field goal, kind of notwithstanding, like there was a good drive. Utah made a great play on that. The unfortunate part was it was returned 77 yards for a touchdown rather than just jumping on the ball.
Well, and Colt, also just to clarify that, the only reason they kicked the field goal instead of going for it was because of a false start penalty. So they were going to line up and go for it, I think, for 4th and 4. Instead, they back up. And, when you back up for a kicker and you're trying to kick a 50-yard kick and, the kicker's got to pull out a 3-wood to try to, hit this through the uprights, sometimes it comes out lower. That really wasn't the case here. Utah just jumped over Baylor's snapper. And I mean, there were 2 guys back there. I don't know how that happens, but they allowed that
particular play. Yeah, I don't know that particular play. Like a lot of times you say you can't touch the deep snapper, or you can't do this or that. There must have been a loophole in that rule because 2 guys did it. It was extremely obvious and it happened. And if they wouldn't have got it, Caleb Lohner might have had it behind him. And the frustrating part about that particular play is not only was it a 10-point swing, but Isaiah Hankins went on to kick 2 more field goals that were relatively tough kicks. So you feel pretty good about he probably would have made that kick. It looked to be on line when he kicked it. Instead of getting 3 points, that could have been the difference. Utah gets 7 points. Just a tough situation there with that particular play. But back to the offense. I mean, we knew going in Utah's strength of their defense was the front 7. The secondary was a question mark. And would Baylor be able to test it? They were not able to test it. I mean, there was almost immediate pressure most of that beginning of the game. And obviously one of those sacks led to a fumble on Daquan Finn. And I think from that point, he was extremely rattled. The pace of the game kind of was beyond him after that point. And to his credit, or to his whatever you want to call it, like he took some hits in that game, and you don't want to see your quarterback taking those kind of hits.
He definitely did. And I mean, here's the simple fact of the matter. You allow your quarterback to get hit like that on just the second drive of the game. I mean, he took 1 step and got just destroyed on the weak side. When you allow that to happen, it does ring in the back of your head like, oh, I need to get the ball out quickly. And to be fair, I also felt like Baylor had 0 confidence that they were going to be able to hold up in pass protection at the beginning of the game. I mean, everything they were doing was quick game stuff. They were running the ball right into the middle of the defense. I think it really did take them time to kind of settle into exactly what they felt like they could actually do against Utah a little bit, trying to feel it out. The problem was the feeling out process resulted in a bunch of 3 and outs, and that's really difficult on your defense. So I agree with you with Finn. I think that was just a terrible start to the game. And I will say this, though, towards the end of the half, they did move the ball some. And then the last drive of the half, they moved it all the way down in kind of a 2-minute drill style, which was great to see. Finn was accurate with his throws, found Michael Trigg a few times, Hal Presley twice. That was nice. Nice to see that and see them go up tempo and get some points before half. And, I'll say when it was 23-3 and it looked like Cam Rising probably wasn't going to come back in the game, it felt like Baylor had actually captured some momentum at halftime, especially, or at least a little bit on the offensive side, which obviously they were going to have to score a lot of points in the second half.
Yeah. So Utah scored the first 23 points of the game. Baylor scored the final 12. And I mean, at that point, Baylor was needing points. They went for 2 one time. You kind of playing the odds there, going for 2 there. Maybe you can gain some ground that you might not otherwise would. I think people question, why do you go for 2 there? Well, if you don't get it there, you're probably going to get it later. But if you happen to get both, you're another step closer. But to your point, the offense kind of finding a groove. The rushing game specifically, first quarter, 7 carries, and this includes sacks, okay? First quarter, 7 carries for negative 15 yards. A lot of that was the negative 22 yards on the sack fumble. Yeah. Second quarter, 12 for 34. Third quarter, 18 for 87, which one of those was a longer run. And then the fourth quarter, Utah just ate up the possession. Baylor only had 3 rush attempts in the fourth quarter of the game for 2 yards. But I think there's some, for the run game specifically, I think there were some good things there because we know that Utah wanted to control the run game and bring pressure, and Baylor still found a little bit of success. And I'll say it, I do think Dominic Richardson got a couple more carries in this game, or his first carries of the season. He brings a little bit more pop to that. And then Dawson Pendergrass, obviously he had the long run, but he was consistently hitting that 3 yard per carry and you need that. Like you want to have 5+, right? But like if you can get 3 yards a carry and not goes backwards, it's a positive. And so I think there's something to grow on there. Obviously, Utah's game plan shifts a little bit, but once Cam Rising goes out, the conversation for Utah was, we have to win this with our defense at this point. Run game, defense. And Baylor, for the most part, kind of answered the bell there, and they were able to run the ball a little bit. And obviously on the defensive side of the ball, they were able to stop it as well.
Yeah, to an extent. The Dawson Pendergrass run was great. I mean, Omar Igbedian, what a block. I mean, he pulled and it was one heck of a block on the end, and it created a huge hole, and Pendergrass took advantage of it, showed off his speed in the open field. Love to see that. But I mean, if you take away that run from Pendergrass, he was 8 for 23 yards. So I mean, like, it's 3 yards carry, but it still was not very good. And then your other starting running back, Richard Reese, is 9 for 15 yards. They just could not get anything going, and they kept attempting to try it, and they kind of had to, because they had to try to slow down the pass rush at all, like some. And so really, I felt like the thing that actually gave Baylor some life was when they started using more designed quarterback runs for DeQuan Finn. And I know the stats don't look good, 13 for 7 yards rushing, but that was not indicative of kind of how the game looked in the second half. The 22-yard fumble, he got sacked, I think, 2 other times, which takes away numbers. But in general, he got a bunch of first downs on carries. He was able to move the chains, and he read the holes pretty well. I was kind of surprised by that, because when I've seen Finn in the past, I didn't really view him as a great designed runner. I viewed him more as a really good improv runner. But I was actually impressed. He got physical. He powered through some guys. He also got down a few times, which you love to see from your quarterback. And I felt like that really allowed them to be a little more creative offensively, despite not being able to run the ball or throw the ball very well.
Yeah, no, it did. And I think Finn's legs are going to be what makes the offensive run game go. But I think that's truly what we've known from the beginning, is like his legs are going to have to help those situations, and throwing that Dominic Richardson, Bryson Washington, kind of your 2 more power backs. Pendergrass has it, but maybe not the burst that those 2 do. You needed him to be able to run the football, and we didn't see it much in the first game. We saw it this game late, but I truly like the offense just did not have the opportunity to settle in. I think we didn't see the quick pass game against Tarleton. They were going to bring it out in this game, and then the first 2-step drop that Finn has, he's getting hit in the back. So I think it was a potential glimpse that was not executed in what Baylor can do in the quick pass game because of Utah's defensive front. And I think you have to give their defensive front credit for what they were able to do, and probably what they'll do a lot this season. And maybe not to the extent that Baylor struggled, but it's kind of a perfect storm situation where Utah's defensive front, Baylor's inexperienced offensive front for the most part in a new scheme, just like 2 opposite worlds colliding, and Baylor struggled on early and just couldn't get out of the way of that hole.
Yeah, and I mean, you give up points early on in the game, and then you're asking your offense to try to come back on the road at Utah. That's a recipe for disaster. You cannot start like that. And like I mentioned, it was the defense as well. They did give up a touchdown drive early in the game that set them back, and then the fumble, another touchdown. So it's just one of those things where you got to start better than that. And Aranda was very honest about that in the press conference. Just he felt like he hyped this game up too much and put too much on this game. And really, I think those emotions maybe kind of cost Baylor at the end, because those few plays, you flip them the other way, and maybe Baylor has a chance in this one. But yeah, I think I do want to hit on a couple things with Fenn, because I've been getting a whole lot of it feels like there's been a whole lot of negative takes about DeQuan Fenn, and I understand he didn't play very well against Utah. I honestly wouldn't say really anyone played great in this game offensively for Baylor. But I think in general, there's a few things that we need to keep in mind here. You're asking him to lead a comeback on the road against the best defense that they're going to play all year. I really don't even know that it's close. Maybe Iowa State, possibly. That's a problem. You're asking him to lead a comeback on the road against that same defense that is now just pinning their ears back and coming after you and not really worried about giving up a big play because they have a cushion now. And then I also feel like it's really tough when Baylor's not able to convert on layups. And we've talked about this even in the Tarleton State game. They really were just trying to take shots down the field. And they really need to find ways to create more layups in this offense. And maybe that's coming. Maybe that's part of the install, that it's just maybe is going to take a little bit of time. But I do think that is important to note. It didn't feel like there were easy throws for Finn to make the majority of the game. It was like you're asking him to buy time, and then you're asking him when he doesn't have pressure to be able to find someone down the field, way down the field. I mean, it felt like there were Baylor guys running 25 yards downfield and no one's over the middle of the field. No one's close to the line. And you're just saying, oh, okay, get out of the pocket and try to make a play. It just felt really tough to not have something a little easier for him to convert, but maybe they just didn't have that ability in this matchup.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is it's built on option routes. And I think that if Utah says, hey, we're going to take away all the quick game, we're going to either, if you drop back, we're going to come after you with the pass rush, or we're just going to play underneath your routes. I haven't watched the film. I haven't seen exactly what Utah was doing. I think a lot of it will come down to that, because early on, I felt like the attempt was, let's get the ball out to the perimeter. And if it was to a running back, he missed throws there. I think he missed throws later in the game to the flat to running backs, just because he was pressing so much, just getting the ball off. So I think I do think that you have to give Utah credit in knowing we're going to take away this area of his game because we believe he's going to do it. Even though he didn't show it in game one, we believe this is what they're going to do. So maybe they're just playing underneath routes. We get pressure off the edge and see what happens. So I'm really anxious to see how this offense bounces back against an Air Force team that is going to be disciplined, but it's not going to have near the athletes at Utah. You mentioned this particular defense for Utah being the best in the league, or Iowa State maybe being there close. I think where Utah differs is they're probably going to have a little bit better of athletes than what Iowa State will present. Iowa State is going to play extremely disciplined. I think Utah has that discipline plus a lot of good athletes, the way they've recruited and established that system. So I want to see Finn bounce back. I want to see the offense come back, throw the ball around, have success, gain some confidence, because what they face in this particular week might not be able to be replicated by anyone else. I mean, it's on the road, a very good defense, a struggling offense, and just perfectly snowballed. So I'm anxious to see how they bounce back from this particular game, beginning this week against Air Force.
And they're going to have to. Air Force presents a lot fewer challenges, and it's at home. And this offense does have to bounce back. And to be clear, the entire offense needs to play better, including DeQuan Finn. Like, he does need to play better. Everything about this offense needs to get better next week, because, after next week, it's all Big 12 play. And from what I've seen from the Big 12, there are going to be a lot of winnable games on this schedule. Yeah. But the only way it's winnable is if this offense does it has to take a step forward, I think, for them to really, truly be competitive in these games going forward.
Yeah, no doubt. So that gives it an opportunity to talk about the defense. And I think, obviously, if you watch the game, that's the highlight. And even, the first possession of the game for Utah, Baylor goes out and Utah has scripted plays. You know that they're going to go out and try to execute their offense to the full extent and drive one with Cam Rising in this game. And Baylor forced them to punt. But it was so quick of a turnaround to give them the ball back. The defense goes back out there and starts by giving up, I think it was a 45-yard touchdown play. And it was a reverse, to the credit of, it was schemed well. Actually, I would say Baylor was almost too disciplined in the way that they played that, because 4 or 5 guys saw the fake reverse and jetted back. Devin Bobby being one, Jackie Marshall being another one that you just saw, at least on the TV version of it. So almost over-disciplined, and it completely opened up the play. You don't really see that fake reverse kind of, bluff, I guess, the best way to put it, work, but it worked there, and it got them the home run play. But outside of that, man, I thought this team, there were some pass interference issues. There was, you're always going to have blown assignments where the offense doesn't execute. But overall, I thought there was what we expected from this defense after week one was still present. They were disruptive, held up strong against the run. The front seven played well. The secondary still wasn't tested to the full extent that we'll see them against Colorado or maybe Texas Tech or TCU. But the entire defense, to me, showed growth, and I think they're only going to have potential to get better if they can continue to build off. They weren't great, but if they continue to build off of this, I think they can continue to get better and obviously be the strength of this team.
I agree. And it looks like they're going to have to be. And I was impressed for the most part with Baylor defensively. I felt like they held up pretty well. Obviously, they weren't responsible for the fact that Utah got the ball at the 5-yard line. They weren't responsible for the special teams touchdown. So if you take those away, talking about you gave up 10 points. Yes, I know Cam Rising didn't play in the second half, but still they only scored 10 points with Cam Rising on the field. So they did a really good job in general. There was one thing that I was a little disappointed in, and I feel like it's fair to talk about this because I think it is something that, at times one side of the ball is going to be having the better day, going to be having the advantage, going to have the opportunity to really capitalize and take advantage of things. And I felt like that drive late in the game, 7.5-minute drive they gave up to Utah. You can't have that. It's the backup quarterback in the game. You got to find a way to make that guy beat you. And they were giving up run plays. They were just getting ran on. And that was something that I was disappointed in because the offense really they needed more opportunities. They need more opportunities on the field. And to give up a 7.5-minute drive, I know Utah misses the field goal, but that was the ball game. Like 7.5 minutes, they couldn't afford to allow that much time to come off the clock. So that was a little disappointing. But I do think in general, their run defense has gotten better. Their linebacker play has gotten a lot better. Their defense line has gotten a lot better. And I do think the secondary, while there were some issues, I'm seeing guys that I feel like are more experienced and more used to kind of seeing certain plays and actually reacting and making those plays. So I'm encouraged by it. I don't think they're perfect. I think they are going to give up explosive plays. I think we saw that in this game, but I am encouraged by the defensive environment in general. I think they're good. They're good. And Dave Aranda seems to have kind of gotten that group back on track.
Yeah. I think one thing that hasn't been talked about, I haven't even seen it on the message boards, the fact that Carl Williams did not play at all. He didn't play a single snap. And in this particular game, that star position was important. And so it didn't become a glaring issue. And I think that's a positive because, I mean, as much as we talked about Brant Keithy going into this game, I don't know. What did he finish with stats wise? 1 catch for 5 yards, which obviously that was a game plan thing for Baylor. They played a lot of 4 linebackers. Raw Dilworth played quite a bit in this game. And as a linebacker. And so I'm really anxious to see that going forward. But the fact that Carl Williams didn't play, he was being used in the deep safety and the SAR positions. And he was a guy that you would expect to be on the field for 90% of the snaps in this game. He wasn't there. And not that led to pass interference issues, but Caden Jenkins had 2 interferences, I believe. And it was just a discipline issue. Like it wasn't being beat. Like he just eyes got lost and had to grab a receiver. And when one of them was on a 3rd and 15 play where you just can't have it. So there's still a lot of room for this defense to grow up. I think the encouraging thing, and if it's not encouraging you're missing the boat on it, but this team's ability to stop the run outside of the last, I think they're a little bit gassed at the end of the game. And I think you could have forced the issue a little bit more in terms of stopping the plays. So just a disappointing part for me for the defense was being the fact that they didn't get the big play turnover. They didn't have an interception where they get points off of it. Utah had that. They had 2 of those moments, and obviously the blocked field goal being a special teams issue. But then Baylor's defense, they played solid, didn't get the big play. You wish and hope that they have those moments. Like the 21 team had those moments pretty consistently. And you have to find ways to get the opposing offense. Now, I think to a great extent, Utah knew what they wanted to do offensively, especially late in the game, and they didn't give those opportunities to Baylor. But you want to figure out how to get those moments, and they didn't have one this week.
Exactly. And you knew when they were down 23-0, Baylor was going to have to force at least 1 turnover. Like you kind of just knew that in order to win this game, they're going to need one. And you thought with Isaac Wilson in there, who threw 2 interceptions in their first game, he might give them a chance, but he didn't. And they just ran the football. And I think the only one they had a chance on was actually Caden Jenkins was in coverage. It ended up being a really well-thrown ball because it was high and wide, but Caden had stepped in front of it. It felt like if he had made a throw kind of on the numbers, it probably would have been picked off. But that was about the only opportunity. I think Devin Lemire had one across the middle of the field that he broke up on Brant Keithy that maybe he could have come up with a pick there. But outside of that, they didn't really have many opportunities. Like there really weren't situations where guys were dropping the ball or where Utah fumbled it and Baylor didn't get it. They didn't really force those chances, and they were going to have to in this game.
Yeah, and I truly believe you expect that from Utah especially once they got up in this game. It was about protecting the ball offensively. Cam Rising goes out, continue to protect the ball, run the ball, and until that last drive where they controlled the clock, I think they had 8 minutes of time of possessions in that fourth quarter, and that's tough because like you have to figure out how to get off the field. Utah didn't give it up. Baylor didn't make a stop. But I think overall you have to be encouraged about the direction of this defense compared to a year ago. I mean, obviously it starts on the defensive line. Those guys to me are only going to get better. I thought Big E, Linus Noel had a very good game in terms of taking on blockers, allowing Matt Jones and Keaton Thomas to make plays. And that's one thing about this defense that continues to impress me, man. Like they have been super physical for the first 2 weeks. This was not present a year ago. And that's a credit, 100% credit to the defensive staff. But obviously recruiting wise, like Steve Linton's flying around on the ball, Keaton Thomas, who we've mentioned, Kendrick, Simpkins. I mean, those three guys particularly don't mind mixing it up. And it's helped guys like Matt Jones become more physical. And so you want to obviously this week against Air Force is crucial, playing against the run in the front seven, and then you hope it continues. And I think it's just overall encouraging that group continued to play at a physical level against Utah, who's going to bring the physicalness themselves.
And I think it's important to remember that Baylor was, I'm not going to say they weren't playing at full strength because everyone has injuries, but I do think that, you look around and you see, okay, Carl Williams didn't play. Well, he's supposed to be probably a top 3 or 4 defender on this team.
Yeah.
Maybe even better than that.
Maybe the best in the secondary. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely a possibility. And then you also look and say, oh, okay, their defense line's been really good. Well, Cooper Lands left the game rather early. He would have been a big factor late, probably would have helped them on that last drive a ton. Don't know what is going on with him, but he limped off the field at one point. Jaquez Evans hasn't played yet, and he was a all-conference USA type performer. If they can get him back, I mean, all these things, like it could make them even better on defense. Tevin Williams, if they get him back at cornerback, that could help some things. So I think looking around and just kind of and then also Bryson Washington on offense, for their run game, maybe he adds a different level there, or adds something to the mix that they, maybe don't have, or that, he brings to the table that's different. But I think in general, when I look around the games in the Big 12 and I look around the various matchups that I've seen, I think it's very clear that there are multiple teams in this league that if your defensive line and your defensive front are really good, it's going to be a huge problem for a few of these offenses. And we've seen it, from a lot of these teams. If they can't handle the pressure up front, and if they can't run the football consistently, if they're giving up pressures on the quarterback, it's very difficult to score. So if Baylor's defense can continue to grow from this point on, and they're going to be challenged in a different way against Air Force, and then in another very different way against Colorado, if they can grow, I think there is something to build on here, and something where you go, Baylor's defense could really give them an opportunity to win any game that they play on this schedule, just about.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the results of the Big 12 through this point, and it's interesting because Baylor has actually played Utah was a non-conference game, who looks like the best team right now in the league to me. I think there's cases maybe made for Iowa State after their win over Iowa, but overall that looks like the best team. And not that Baylor was the benchmark, it's just more about what we knew of Utah coming into this season. And I don't know that there is another clear cut besides Iowa State and Utah at this juncture, maybe Kansas State to an extent, but they struggled against Tulane. Avery Johnson hasn't played extremely well, but I think Baylor's identity developed in the first 2 games is kind of still wide open because they've played the worst game on their schedule and arguably the toughest game on their schedule with Tarleton at home versus Tarleton State and on the road at Utah. So there's a lot to learn about Baylor. And with that said, what do you believe that this team's identity is going into this next stretch of games? And what do you expect that, what can we see? What do we expect to see from this team against Air Force and Colorado and then BYU? That's a pretty critical stretch. Those are 3 very winnable games in my mind. But what can we expect from this team in those 3 games and obviously moving forward?
I think it's a defense that's going to continue to grow and continue to get better. I really like where they're kind of heading and how they've performed up to this point. And they really swarmed Tarleton. I think they made things tough on Utah, especially in the run game and then in the pass game towards the end of the game. So I think we're going to see a defense that's going to get better towards the end of the year. And I'm glad they have an identity of, being very physical up front and having linebackers that are swarming to the football and, trying to force turnovers. That's kind of what they've said is in their DNA. And so we'll see if they can kind of build on that going forward. But I think that's what I look at, that physicality, that edge, and the talent they have on defense, I think is all something I'm expecting to see grow. Offensively, you could tell me a number of things, to be honest with you. You could tell me this team, ends up throwing the ball really well by the end of the year. You could tell me that this team simply can't move the ball the whole year. Like, you could tell me a number of things, and I would have a hard time saying you're wrong, like, based on what we've seen so far. I think it's been such a mixed bag, and I don't think they really have an identity yet on offense. And that's hard. It's hard to win football games when you don't have your core principles locked in. Like, when you don't have something that you feel great about, like you don't have your fastball, it's really hard to win when your changeup is just okay and your curveball is just okay. You got to find something that, is really your bread and butter. So I'm curious if they can find that. And, truthfully, going into this Air Force game, Air Force just lost to San Jose State. They gave up like 270 yards passing. They've been far better against the run than the pass. So this feels like a game where you do need DeQuan Finn to really play well. Like, you need your quarterback position to play well. And so he's going to have to, I think, take that step forward this week if this offense is going to truly take a step forward.
Yeah. And I would say, I mentioned this before, it's kind of like Baylor's played the easiest game on their schedule and the hardest game on their schedule. We haven't seen that matchup against an average foe, or maybe not. Tarleton being an FCS, I think that kind of puts it in perspective. But like, Air Force is going to be that kind of first in-between game. They're going to be solid. They're not going to be overwhelming, but they run the triple option offensively, so it's going to put your defense in a bind. So we might not – I wouldn't expect to learn a lot there. But offensively, you can say, okay, it's probably a step above Tarleton, so we'll learn a little bit more. I don't think in that game against Tarleton they showed a ton. I just don't. I mean, what we saw, the game plan against Utah, it was going to be different than what they did. They just couldn't ever get into it. So I think we're about to hit a stretch where we're going to see more evenly matched games. And if your expectations are to go out and dominate every single game, you're probably going to be disappointed. But I think offensively, we're going to learn a lot more, because Tarleton was an opportunity to see a lot. Utah kind of was, but Utah is just good. I think that was just a bad matchup overall. Defensively, I'm with you. Like, I think that group's going to get just a little bit better and a little bit better. They have the ability to adjust to different personnel. We saw it in this game against Utah, running 4 linebackers with Raw Dilworth. I think they have the opportunity to go into dime defenses and still be strong. So you face a team like Texas Tech, you can completely scrap that plan that you had against Utah, but you have the personnel to adjust to it. And that's going to be crucial for this particular season because of the variances in offenses. You look at BYU, you look at Colorado, you look at Iowa State, then you look at Texas Tech. Like, there's just so many different ranges of what you have to defend. I think Baylor has that opportunity to defend it. So I don't know what this team's identity is overall. I think to win the next few games is going to start on the defensive side of the ball until we learn more about the offense.
It is. It definitely is. But I do think this is an important one because I think Air Force is pretty clearly the second worst team on this schedule. I mean, Baylor's opening as a 15.5-point favorite. Like, they're expected to win this game handedly. And to me, that says everything about the offense because Air Force has not been scoring the ball well on anyone. And I expect Baylor's defense to stifle them to a pretty high degree. Like, if Air Force scores more than 17 points, I'd be pretty disappointed in that performance by Baylor defensively. But for the Baylor offense, this feels like an opportunity for you to go out and solve some of the things that maybe plagued you early on, because I mean, it is pretty obvious, you know, after this game, you're going to have to score some points against Colorado. You're going to have to score some points against a few of these teams on your schedule. So it does need to start, I think, this week. There are signs that it could happen, but there are also signs that this could go sideways. And so it just kind of goes, you know, it depends on kind of, how do they adjust? How much more do they install? And just how does the play of everyone kind of mesh? And I think that's going to be really important to watch going forward. But in this game, obviously, it was a tough one against a really good Utah team.
Yeah. All right, Baylor family. That's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. A lot more to get to this week in previewing Air Force, visiting with some players and coaches, and just talking all things Baylor Athletics. Blackout game this Saturday. Baylor reintroduces the anthracite uniforms, which will be pretty cool to see. So make sure you get your blackout gear for that one. For Grayson Grudenhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great Monday, and Sick 'em Bears.